The New York Giants' initial 53-man roster is in the books. We have takeaways on how it's shaped up, including what it still needs to be added over the next few days. That's coming away next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, a credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find my written work. And as always, welcome on in to my Blue Crew community members, to my everydayers, my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And if you are watching on YouTube, please consider subscribing to the channel. And if you do, click that little notification bell so that you get an alert every time we post a new video. And if you would, like the video, that all helps in the long run, and it is appreciated. All right, on today's Locked On Giants podcast, the 53-man roster is set, the initial 53-man roster. Now, probably by the time some of you who might be watching this podcast later in the day on Wednesday, you might find that things change. All right, there's going to be additional moves that are made. So we're going to talk about the initial 53, and the Giants, for whatever reason, they took an awful long time to get the announcement out. We didn't get the announcement till, I want to say, 8:30, 8:45. So even though I had most of the roster laid out, it was still kind of late getting here because there were still some moves that I wasn't sure as far as who was going to end on IR and all that stuff. But we'll go over all that, and I'll give you my takeaways. All right, let's kick things off with the biggest moves that were made on the 53-man roster. I have a couple things here really that I thought kind of stood out to me. And that is the Giants moved on from 3 of their own draft picks, 2 of whom, by the way, were picked by Joe Schoen in his first year as Giants GM. So the 3 draft picks that were dropped include Darnay Holmes, who was part of the previous regime, Marcus McKethan, offensive lineman, and Darian Beavers, inside linebacker. Now, in the case of McKethan and Beavers, bottom line there is those 2 guys, they got injured and they were never quite the same. So, the Giants, look, they try and give the guys every possible opportunity to come back from an injury. Look at how long they stuck with Aaron Robinson before they finally decided to cut bait on him. So, they wanted to bring these guys back. They just were not able to recapture what they were prior to their injuries. And now they are on the street. Now, whether or not they come back on the practice squad, that remains to be seen. But those guys were part of the initial cuts. All right. Another surprise, I think, for me at any rate, is that the Giants kept 10 linebackers. Now, I initially had them keeping 9. I think I had them keeping 4 outside linebackers and 5 inside linebackers. Because, again, I wasn't really sure what was going to happen with Matthew Adams, who's injured, with Deontay Johnson, who's dealing with an injury. All right. So not really knowing the injury situation was kind of tricky, but they kept 5 outside linebackers, which I think is just too much. All right. So they have Azeez Ojulari, Benton Whitley, who, Whitley deserved to make the roster, in my opinion, Boogie Basham, Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau. I think somebody's going to get flipped. I really do. I think somebody is going to get moved from that group. If I'm the Giants, I try and move Azeez Ojulari. I know he's young, and I know some of you are going to say, oh, you can never have too many pass rushers. Why would you want to move Azeez Ojulari? He's in the final year of his contract. I don't think they retain him, to be honest with you. So if you could flip him for either draft picks or maybe even a cornerback, I say do it, because I don't think you need five. You're not going to dress all 10 of those linebackers on game day. So what's the point of carrying 10? I mean, if you can move one and then maybe put somebody on the practice squad, maybe you pick up another guy or something. Why not do that? I mean, you could use the roster spot, I'm sure, someplace else. So, all right. So the inside linebackers, for what it's worth, they kept Bobby Okereke, Carter Coughlin, Darius Mawaso, Deontay Johnson, and Micah McFadden. Johnson and McFadden are both dealing with injuries. Now, interestingly enough, Matthew Adams was also kept, but he was one of the guys they used that new IR rule on. So they were able to put him on IR today, but they designated him for return, which means in about 4 weeks' time, if he's healthy, he can come back and be designated for return. Well, he is designated for return, but he can come back after 4 weeks if he is healthy. So they chose to do that. That counts against their 8 for the season. But Deontay Johnson, who's week to week, Carter Coughlin, who's been dealing with an injury, Micah McFadden's been dealing with an injury. I mean, I'm assuming, and I know that's dangerous, but I'm assuming those guys are closer to returning. But I'm curious to see if maybe one of them goes on IR, because the difference here is once you put them on IR after the season starts, you don't necessarily have to designate them for return. You can kind of see how it goes. And if they're ready after 4 weeks, you can, open their 21-day window. If they're not, you can leave them on until you have a roster spot. So I have a feeling one of those guys might land on IR. Just a gut feeling here. All right. If we're continuing to talk about surprises, for me, the biggest surprise, and in retrospect, maybe I shouldn't be surprised about this, is that the Giants did keep fullback / tight end Jacob Johnson. Now, we all got swept up in Jacob Johnson because here he is. He comes in the day before the Giants play their second preseason game against the Texans. He's familiar with the blocking that's taught by offensive line coach Carmen Brasillo from their days together out in Las Vegas. And he played pretty well. Plus, he could play special teams. So that had us all thinking, oh, maybe they're going to keep a fullback. First time Brian Daboll, as head coach of the Giants, is going to keep a fullback. Shame on me for not realizing this. And it's funny because I said it, and I think I wrote it way back early in the start of camp. First off, if the Giants need a blocking tight end, a jumbo tight end, they're going to use an offensive lineman. That's what they've done the last 2 years. But here's the other thing. They've got Elijah Chapman on the roster, the young defensive tackle who went from being a tryout player to making the 53. Elijah Chapman has done some fullback work. So that's probably what they're going to do if they need to use a fullback. That's just my guess. But, in thinking about it, had they kept Jacob Johnson, that would have meant keeping 4 tight ends. And they just were going to keep 4 tight ends. I've been saying all along that the passing game is going to run through the receivers. So why would you keep 4 tight ends? And, you'd have to put one down. Even if you classified him as a running back, the Giants only have 3 running backs on the roster right now. It still would be maybe one guy too many. So in retrospect, like I said, I probably should have seen that coming. I didn't. My bad. I wasn't the only one who didn't see that coming. So it is what it is. All right. Coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast, the Giants made a lot of moves, but they also have some where they need help. So we're going to talk about those right after this. Hey, Giant fans. So you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Just visit fanduel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. Hey, Giant fans, thank you so much for making the Locked On Giants podcast your first listen today. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. Get daily insight into the best fantasy draft strategies so that you can win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and coming up this week on the Locked On Giants podcast, I'm going to have special guest Mike Sando from The Athletic. He recently came out with his annual 2024 tier ranking of NFL quarterbacks, and we're going to talk about not so much where Daniel Jones landed, which, as you can imagine, right now it's the bottom tier, but how he got there and whether or not this guy is salvageable. Some interesting stuff with my discussion with Mike Sando. So that's going to come up later in the week. Also coming up later in the week, I hope to have on Ty Dunn. Now, Ty Dunn is a independent writer of Go. He runs Go Long, which is long form writing. And I ran into him during summer training camp. He was in town to do a series on the New York Giants, a really good in-depth series. And Ty always does a really good job. So we'll probably have him on the show as well as we inch closer to the start of the regular season. And of course, we'll keep you updated on all the roster moves that are going to be made, because I'm sure there's going to be some that are going to be made between now and the time the Giants take the practice field next week to start to get ready for week 1 against the Minnesota Vikings. In this segment, where do the Giants still need help? Okay, we have the initial 53-man roster. We know what it looks like as of, Tuesday night, but where do they still need help? And I actually have actually three areas that I think they really need help. The first one's pretty obvious, cornerback. We've been talking about this all summer long. This cornerback group, Cordell Flott is still hurt. He's week to week. They're going to probably need to ramp him up. Behind him, you've got a bunch of young and inexperienced guys. None of these veterans really panned out for the Giants. They got to get a veteran cornerback in here. I mean, I just don't see how they start the season without one. And whether they trade for one, whether one is available out there on the street or on the waiver wire, they got to get a better option in there. And in the next segment, we're actually going to talk about some guys that they can look at, but I'm going to hold off on that until we get to segment 3. The other spot I feel the Giants really need to consider, and this is actually one we haven't been talking about, but we need to, backup center. Okay, so John Michael Schmitz, his ankle seems to be fine. There's no real worry about that. But all right, he has now had the shoulder issue. He has had the ankle issue. I mean, I'm a little concerned. I don't want to say that he's injury prone, but that's, he had the shoulder last year. He missed a game because of a shin injury. I get it. These guys get banged up, but some of them, get banged up to the point where they can play through it, and some of them do not. And I'm just a tad concerned that John Michael Schmitz is heading down the wrong path there with regards to injuries and his health. Now, at backup center, the Giants decided they're going to stick with Austin Schlottman. I believe Jimmy Morrissey, who did not make the roster, I think he goes to the practice squad. But here's the thing. Jimmy Morrissey didn't really crack the second team offensive line. So it was pretty much, when John Michael Schmitz was sidelined for the 10 practices that he missed, it was pretty much Schlottman and Greg Van Roten rotating in there. Now, I'm sorry, guys. I don't want to see Greg Van Roten move to center if Schmitz can't play. And it's not because I think Greg Van Roten is terrible. That's not the case at all. Why I don't want to see Van Roten moved in at center is because now you're upsetting the whole apple cart. You're moving around multiple positions on that offensive line. All right. So instead of just leaving Van Roten at right guard next to Jermaine Illuminor and leaving John Runyon Jr. at left guard next to Andrew Thomas, just plug in a center, whether it be Schlottman, whether it be somebody better. All right. If you're going to go with Van Roten, now you've got a new center. You're going to have to put in a new guard. Do you flip John Runyon over to the right side and put in Aaron Stinney? The less movement you have to make on an offensive line, the better. And if the Giants aren't sure that Austin Schlottman is their guy, and I got to think they did their homework on him because they gave him a 2-year contract. But if they're not sure, they get another center in here. Don't play around with this. If it means sending Jake Kubas, who has potential to become a center guard, but he's still young and still raw, if it means sending him to the practice squad, then do it. I don't mean to sound heartless about this. I'm glad that Kubas made the 53. Nice kid. I talked to him the other day after the Jets game in the locker room, but I don't want to see that offensive line have to get jumbled up because I don't think that's a good thing for that offensive line. The less moving around you got to do, the better. So that's definitely a position I think that they might look at, but we'll see how they feel about Schlottman. I think they're going to roll with him and just hope that John Michael Schmitz holds up. But I'll tell you what, if he ends up getting hurt again, I'm really going to start to get worried about that position. All right, there's one other position that we're not really talking about again, but we need to be, and that's the return specialists. Now, Gunnar Olszewski made the 53. It is assumed that he is going to be fine, because he's been dealing with, an injury, and he's been week to week. But, is he going to have that explosiveness, that burst when he is cleared to come back from the injury? That might take some time to come back. And if he is not ready to go, then what do? I don't know about you, but I don't want to see Malik Neighbors back there. I don't want to see Deonte Banks back there. I don't want to see any potential starting players on offense or defense returning punts. I just don't want to see it. And I don't care if they're the best option available. Don't put them out there for a risk of getting hurt. We've seen that happen too many times. And I get it, you can't coach scared, but you've got to coach smart. All right. So I think if I'm the Giants, maybe I look to pick up a returner because, right now, who's the kickoff returner? Dante Miller did not make the roster. Do you put Eric Gray back there again? I hope not. That experiment didn't go over well. So who do you put back there? So to me, that's still a big question mark for the Giants. And I think that's something that they're going to have to look to address in some way, shape, or form. So that being said, those are my biggest areas of need. You could probably throw in defensive line if you want to upgrade there, maybe at the expense of DJ Davidson, but I don't think that that's as mandatory as maybe some of these other positions. I know some people asked about, bringing in a different quarterback because, is Drew Lock going to be okay? I think Drew Lock is going to be fine. The Giants, as I predicted, they did keep 3 quarterbacks. Tommy DeVito is on the roster. I don't think that will change. I don't, especially if Locke is still gimpy and especially given Daniel Jones's injury history. So, I think that just stays status quo there. So yeah, those are the main areas that I think the Giants could use some additional help. Now, who could they look to help them? We'll talk about that in the next segment. So please don't go anywhere. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I am your host, Patricia Traina. And in this segment, as we look at the New York Giants' initial 53-man roster, and again, who knows, by the time you're listening or watching this video, that roster could change. There could be more moves made. I fully expect there will be, to be honest with you, because, you're going to have the practice squad is going to be set starting at noon on Wednesday. Waivers will be, teams have put in waiver wire claims, and we'll see who gets awarded to whom. So we'll talk, more about the roster, I'm sure, on tomorrow's show as we continue to track this. The roster's going to undergo several changes between now and week one. And then, one other thing I want to mention before I get into some of these guys who I think the Giants might have interest in. There is a rule that if the Giants, or any NFL team for that matter, if they add a vested veteran, and a vested veteran is somebody with 4 or more years experience, if they add that guy and he is on the game day roster as of week one, then that guy's salary becomes guaranteed for the full year. So this is why a lot of times when it comes to veterans, you will see a team wait until week 2, because this way, if the guy gets hurt or if he's not working out, they can get rid of him and only be charged on the cap for the prorated amount of money that they spent for the guy's services. So again, when it comes to vested veterans, unless we're talking a trade or a guy that, the Giants feel so sure is going to be, an answer to their prayers, I would not expect a whole lot in the way of vested veterans being signed, at least not until week 2. So I just wanted to put that little rule out there for those of you not aware of it. Okay, now, who are some guys out on the waiver wire that might be able to help the Giants out? Now, I remember I talked about cornerback being a big need. I talked about returner being a big need. So I have some guys that I wrote down that play those positions. All right. So I'm going to start off with cornerback Stephen Gilmore, who was with the Detroit Lions. Now, the Giants, as we all know, they had two joint practices against the Detroit Lions, as well as a preseason game. So they got an up close and personal look at the Lions personnel. Gilmore, if I'm not mistaken, I believe Mike Trier, who's the Giants safeties coach, was part of the staff when Gilmore was in college. I think he played at Marshall. I think they were together for 2 or 3 years. So there's some familiarity there. Might they kick the tires? Possibly. I mean, it can't hurt, right? So that would be one potential solution for cornerback. Another one, and this one is obviously more obvious. This is one a lot of you asked me about on Twitter. Caleb Farley, who is with the Tennessee Titans. He was cut by the Titans, former number 1 draft pick for the Titans, first round draft pick, I should say. Caleb Farley's problem has always been his ability to stay on the field. He's very injury prone. But, can the Giants live with that and say, well, this is a guy who played for Shane Bowen when Bowen was the defensive coordinator in Tennessee. And, he won't have to learn the system as quickly, or he won't have to take a long time to learn the system because he'll already know it. Is he worth kicking the tires? Folks, not on the waiver wire. He is not. And I'll tell you why. Caleb Farley, if his contract is picked up by the Giants or any team, that team's going to have to pay him $2.5 million base salary. That's kind of a lot for a guy who's had an injury history. So if I'm the Giants and I'm interested in Caleb Farley, maybe what I do is I wait until the waiver, I see if he clears waivers, and then I sign him to a lower contract and maybe throw in some incentives so that he stays healthy. He gets extra money. If he doesn't, the Giants get a cap credit. So Farley's a guy, I think if he passes the physical and he's had some health issues this year, some injury issues, but I would see, if he passes waivers, if maybe he's worth bringing in and what he could potentially bring. All right. I'm going to give you another cornerback, Keenan Isaac from the Bucks. Again, the Giants need outside cornerback help. Isaac's a guy who, might be worth kicking the tires on. You can tell I really believe that cornerback is the biggest need on this team, which it is. So, All right, now let me give you a return specialist. And this is a guy who, according to the NFL Network, he's already drawing a lot of attention around the league. He's going to get scooped up by somebody. It's just a matter of who. And that is former Jacksonville Jaguar Jamal Agnew, a receiver slash return specialist. All right, now, again, right now, Gunnar Olszewski, his injury status unknown, but he's still dealing with something. Isaiah McKenzie was placed on season-ending IR. Dante Miller, a return candidate, on the practice squad, or assuming he lands on the practice squad if he clears waivers. The Giants, to me, they just don't have a return specialist. They really don't. And that is a concern. And, I'm going to just take a look real quick at the flip card from the other night from the Jet game. The depth chart that the Giants had for return specialists: Olszewski, McKenzie, Darius Slayton. He's a possibility, I suppose, as a punt returner, but not sure I would want that. Wan'Dale Robinson, don't want that. Jair Asante, he's been cut. Tyrone Tracy, not sure I want him back there either, especially after that injury scare. And if Tyrone Tracy is going to be running back too. So I'm not sure I want him back there. Kickoff return: Olszewski, McKenzie. Again, McKenzie's on IR. Slayton, Wan'Dale Robinson, Jair Asante, Tyrone Tracy. Folks, I'm pretty sure the Giants are going to need another return specialist, especially if Olszewski is not healthy. So that's something to keep an eye on. All right, that being said, that is our initial look at the initial 53-man roster for the New York Giants. Now, again, we will have newcomers, I'm sure, to talk about on tomorrow's show. If there's anything really major that breaks, I'll get a video out to you guys. So make sure you're keeping a watch on the YouTube channel. Better yet, subscribe and click that little notification bell so that you know when I post a new video. So that's going to do it for me on today's Locked On Giants podcast. As always, thank you for tuning in, spending part of your day with me, and I will see you tomorrow, Giant fans.